Picture this. You're floating in the freezing, pitch-black void of space, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from home. Everything is quiet, routine, and then suddenly, boom. A violent, massive explosion literally rocks your tiny metal ship. Warning lights are blinding you, alarms are absolutely screaming in your ears. In a fraction of a second, what was supposed to be this confident, routine trip to the moon turns into a desperate, terrifying fight for your life. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving right into the harrowing, edge-of-your-seat true story of Apollo 13, which is, without a doubt, the greatest space rescue in human history. Houston, we've had a problem here. I mean, those have got to be some of the most chilling words ever spoken in space exploration, right? Commander Jim Lovell said that on April 13, 1970, right after that massive bang shook the entire spacecraft. And honestly, it instantly threw the three astronauts from their normal routine into absolute terrifying chaos. Down on the ground, Mission Control initially couldn't even wrap their heads around it. They thought, hey, maybe the instruments are just glitching out. But the crew? They didn't need instruments. They could see the devastating truth with their own eyes, right out the window. And what they saw out that window was literally their precious life support, their oxygen, just venting out into the endless vacuum of space. And to really put this into perspective, think about the distance here. They were 330,000 kilometers from Earth. Every single second that ticked by, the force of the blast was pushing them further and further away from our planet. At that exact moment, the mission to walk on the moon was dead. Done. Now, this explainer becomes purely a story of survival. And the only question anyone was asking was, could they even make it back alive? Okay, let's dive into this and step back for just a second to look at the anatomy of the ship so you can really understand what just broke. The Apollo 13 spacecraft basically relied on four main parts. First up, the command module. That's a tiny, cone-shaped pod, just 11 feet long, where the three astronauts sat. Second, you have the service module, which housed the main engines, fuel cells, and absolutely crucially, their oxygen. Third was the lunar module, which was designed strictly to land on the moon. And fourth, the launch escape system, which they had actually already tossed out during liftoff. So that massive explosion, it happened right smack inside that critical service module. Now, to fully grasp the whiplash of this terror, we really have to look at what the mood was like just a day prior. Check out this quote from Mission Control at the 46-hour mark of the flight. They said, "We're bored to tears down here." The mission had been going so flawlessly that the ground crew was actually bored. I mean, astronaut Jack Swigert even had time to joke with the ground control about forgetting to file his income taxes. No one, and I mean no one, anticipated any danger. In fact, by 1970, the public was so used to these lunar missions that the TV networks weren't even bothering to broadcast their live feed. Now, what's really fascinating, and honestly kind of haunting, is that this disaster actually started long before the rocket ever even left Earth. It was a complete chain reaction of hidden mechanical failures. So get this. Oxygen tank number 2 had been accidentally dropped and slightly damaged during maintenance way before the mission. Later on, during testing, they turned on a heater inside that tank to boil off some remaining oxygen. Well, because of a faulty thermometer that literally maxed out at 30 degrees Celsius, nobody realized the heater had actually skyrocketed to a scorching 538 degrees. This extreme heat completely melted the insulation on the electrical wires inside the tank. So when the crew ran a totally routine check in space, those exposed wires sparked and the tank blew. Instantly, NASA is staring down an impossible, agonizing choice to save this crew. Option 1 was the fast way. Basically, fire up the main engine on the service module, spin the ship around, and come straight home. The fatal problem there, that engine was sitting right next to the blast zone. If they ignited it, the whole thing could just explode. So, option 2, the long way. Keep coasting towards the moon, shut down the main ship, use the attached lunar module as a tiny little lifeboat, and use the moon's gravity to basically slingshot them back to Earth. Ultimately, NASA's flight director chose the long way. It was brutally slow, we're talking 4 to 5 days, but theoretically it was the safer bet. As they started executing this terrifying plan, they completely powered down their main ship and literally crammed all 3 grown men into the lunar module. And remember, this is a tiny vehicle designed to hold just 2 people for a maximum of 20 hours. As they looped around the far side of the moon in this makeshift lifeboat, they hit a staggering distance, 400,000 kilometers from home. They officially broke the record for the furthest any human being has ever been from Earth, a record that, by the way, remains unbeaten to this very day. But out there in the absolute dark, they were seriously running out of time. So, The crucial point is this. They are now in a desperate, white-knuckle race against their own dwindling supplies. To survive, they had to execute these perfectly calculated steps. Step 1. Shut down all non-essential power. And yes, that included the heaters, just to save electricity. Step 2. Carefully fire the lunar module's engine to get onto a faster return path. And keep in mind, this engine was absolutely never designed to be fired repeatedly like that. Step 3. Reduce their total flight time to 143 hours. Pulling off this incredibly precarious maneuver carved out a razor-thin 11-hour margin of survival for their remaining oxygen and water. But, space is incredibly unforgiving, and almost immediately a new, deadly ticking clock emerged. Every single time the astronauts exhaled, they were filling their tiny little lifeboat with carbon dioxide. Now, the spacecraft used these lithium hydroxide canisters to filter out the lethal gas. But remember where they are. They're hiding out in the lunar module, which only had enough of its circular canisters for 2 guys for 2 days. They had plenty of spare filters over in the dead command module, but those ones were square. So you literally had a life-or-death situation where you cannot fit a square peg into a round hole. Their own breath was literally starting to poison them. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer unyielding ingenuity of the team down at Mission Control. Given only 24 hours to solve this, the ground experts looked at the random inventory the astronauts had on board: square filters, plastic bags, some cardboard, spacesuit hoses, and duct tape. They essentially played the ultimate game of MacGyver. They radioed up step-by-step instructions, teaching the astronauts how to build this bizarre, cobbled-together contraption out of literal garbage. And incredibly, no way around it, it worked. The carbon dioxide levels finally started dropping. Yet, even with the air clearing up, we really can't ignore the grim, intense human suffering happening inside that metal can. I mean, to save power, they had turned off the heaters, right? So the temperatures inside dropped to near freezing. Plus, to make sure they didn't run out of cooling water for the spacecraft systems, the crew was strictly limited to drinking just 200 milliliters of water a day. That is basically nothing. They became severely dehydrated. Together, the 3 men lost 14 kilograms of body weight, and astronaut Fred Hayes actually developed a really painful urinary tract infection. It gets crazier. They even had to store their own urine inside the ship because venting it out into space could actually act like a tiny thruster and throw the ship completely off its fragile course. But actually, scratch that. Even with all those extreme precautions, the spacecraft still drifted off course anyway. As they were finally approaching Earth, they realized that cooling vapor venting from the ship had unexpectedly acted as a thruster, subtly altering their trajectory. If they didn't fix it right then, they would miss the proper re-entry angle entirely and bounce off the atmosphere. So Commander Lovell was forced to execute a terrifying, totally uncalculated third engine burn using the lunar module just to get back on track. And again, this fragile engine was originally designed to withstand only one single burn to land on the moon. Okay, now let's move to the final, most agonizing hurdle of the whole ordeal. The crew had to finally abandon their lunar lifeboat and squeeze back into that freezing, dead command module, because it was the only part of the ship that had a heat shield and could survive re-entry. The whole world is literally holding its breath watching the news. As the battered pod hits Earth's atmosphere at blistering speeds, the intense heat creates an ionizing shield which plunges the spacecraft into a total communication blackout. Now, normally, the silence lasts about 3 minutes, but 3 minutes pass. Then 4. The ground controllers are just staring at their screens in agonizing tension. Had the heat shield been damaged in the initial blast? Are they gone? Finally, at 4 minutes and 27 seconds, a voice breaks through the static. They had made it. The parachutes deployed perfectly, and the command module splashed down safely into the Pacific Ocean. The sheer, triumphant relief that washed over Mission Control, and honestly the millions of people watching on television around the globe, was absolutely indescribable. The Apollo 13 mission technically failed to put men on the moon, sure, but it stands proudly today in the pages of history as NASA's most spectacular and successful rescue. Which brings us to an ultimate, lingering question. What extreme limits of human ingenuity and resilience can we achieve when our very survival absolutely depends on it? The terrifying, edge-of-your-seat story of Apollo 13 shows us that even when literally everything goes fatally wrong 400,000 kilometers from Earth, good leadership, out-of-the-box thinking, and just unyielding teamwork can still bring us home. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you walk away as in awe of this incredible